Ian A. Little. Oh, let's just Ian a little, why don't we? Cool name. I don't believe we've heard from Ian before. Hi, Ian. How long will it be before private space flight creates self-sufficient colonies in space? I have hope that even if the world goes to hell through civilizational collapse, we can have a reserve of humans in space that can remake society here on Earth when the time is right, as the difficult conditions of living off our planet will inevitably create a very K-type group of humans. There's a lot of assumptions buried in that, and this has been the sad thing of really the last several years for me. When I got to thinking about seriously going on this Aurora story, the Jupiter mission, and all the rest of it, I realized that the idea of it is a lot more romantic and pleasant than the reality of it. Space travel is essentially spending the, if you, assuming you go out there as a colonist and not come back, it's essentially making a commitment to live your entire life inside a passenger jet. That's pretty much it. Certainly, if you're traveling a long way, the en route stuff is essentially you're living in a passenger jet of whatever particular size. The bathrooms are going to stay that size, and you can't leave. You can't go out. And when you put it that way, you begin to see the reality of it. I just am, as a person who was first in line for this kind of thing, who was absolutely ready to go, and who's still ready to go, I'd still go tomorrow without any question. I would go, certainly go into orbit anyway. It seems really cool. Oh, we're living in a spaceship. But if you've ever been on an 18-hour flight or even a 5-6 hour flight, you know that the idea of getting out of that tube is very, very important. And I think if you told people that they were going to go and not come back, that they were going to live like that forever, you'd have a lot of people who would, like me, say, sign me up. But I think over time, you would have people beginning to realize that this is just not a way to live, which I find I'm astonished to hear myself say this, to be honest with you. What I think I could tolerate, and I think what will be the case if we get to that point based on private industry, because I don't think NASA's ever going to fly people in space again. I think that what I could tolerate, in fact, I'm sure I could tolerate, is the idea of a mission. Maybe it's a 2-year mission, a 5-year mission. But when it's over, you come back to Earth and you get a little house and you sit on the porch and you think about your travels. And you got your rocking chair and your dog or your cat and, breeze and stuff. I'd be willing to ride in a commercial jet for years to see things and come back. I'd be willing to put up with it. But the idea that I'd do it forever, I don't know. Now, there is a couple other interesting things in your question here, Ian. One of them is that I'm not taking into account the absolutely astonishing ability of humans to adapt to just about anything. You read about the story of the lives in these camps. There were people, I just read this yesterday, people in punishment cells in the Gulag, and they would go in to the delousing station, but in the punishment cells it was very, very wet and very damp during the summertime. And they said that when they took off their clothes, the bed bugs and the lice came off of them in sheets, in handfuls of them. They just came off of them. That's a bit of a wake-up call. And when a new prisoner came to the cell in the camp or in the prison, which were designed to hold 5 people and in many cases held 40 or 50. I know that seems impossible, but they literally stacked themselves like cordwood. That's just happened. But whenever somebody new came into the cell, there were never enough sleeping accommodations, so they had to sleep on the floor. And the very new people had to sleep on the floor next to the bucket, which was the only latrine in the cell. And during the course of the night, these people would just be urinated on and defecated on. Most of the prisoners in there had dysentery. And as time went on and your seniority increased, you got to move further and further away from the latrine bucket, living in a mud floor, going out to work in conditions where it was routine. They didn't stop work in the gulag until it got to 60 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. 50 or 60 degrees was the cutoff point, below zero. And these people are out there digging canals with their bare hands. They're using the tools that the Soviets had were so primitive that, and the lives of their people so cheap. And these were the best people they had. They were some of the best people in the world. They'd send them out there 35, 40 degrees below zero. They haven't had anything to eat. They're starving to death. They can barely walk. They're so weak. They give them wooden shovels with essentially just like a paddle, to just kind of heave the stuff across. No mechanized anything. Every single rock, everything taken out of that White Sea Canal and everything else that they built the entire center and north of the country, these prisoners, these Zeks. And you hear stories about these people were being ordered to go out into 30, 40, 50 degrees below zero and dig with their bare hands because they didn't have any tools. With their bare hands, dig into this frozen earth. And still, they managed to stay alive. And they managed to stay alive. And Solzhenitsyn said that the only way he did it was to realize that his life was absolutely over, and that he had a sort of a transcendental clarification, almost like a purification, because he realized pretty early, as I recall in the book anyway, he realized pretty early that one of the causes of the greatest stress and anxiety, being a Zek, being one of these prisoners, was to own anything at all. If you had a little tiny wooden bowl, or if you had a decent pair of boots, all you did was worry about them, and somebody was going to steal them anyway. They put the politicals in there with hardened criminals and murderers, and had nothing to lose. By the way, the Soviet state considered the murderers and rapists to be socially friendly elements. They were stealing from the bourgeoisie, and they just got some bad habits. But you'd have mass, criminal murderers, cutthroats and thieves and rapists in a cell, 4, 5, 6 of them in a cell with 25, 30, 40, history professors and conductors of, orchestras and chemists and stuff. And just a couple of bashed heads and maybe the slit throat or two, pretty much do whatever you want to. And they sent these people out with these tools. And of all the things I remember hearing about the tools, the one thing I'll never forget was they would send them out to cut trees in the north in these freezing conditions. And what they gave them for a saw was a flat piece of metal with notches, teeth cut out of this flat piece of thin metal, just snipped out with tin snips, floppy tin, no teeth, just snipping out on a regular edge on one side. And they had to saw down those trees. And if they didn't do them, they didn't get to them enough, then they didn't eat. The more work you did, the more food you got. The less work you did, the less food you got. So you're either on a survival spiral or a death spiral is pretty much it. Once you get so weak that you can't work anymore, you just get weaker and weaker and weaker until you die. So when you talk about things like spaceflight, and I talk about how kind of not inhuman but anti-human that environment is, I come back to the fact that some of these people lived in these camps for 20 years and managed to adapt. And a few of them were more comfortable in the camps than they were outside. Once they got out of the camps, by the way, they weren't welcomed with open arms back into society. They went into something called internal exile, where they had no papers, no internal passport. No one would risk hiring them, because to hire a political was to basically just beg to be investigated or put in up camps yourself. So some of these people who'd endured unimaginable hardship and torture basically found themselves out in society and decided they wanted to go back, because even if it was just a lump of bread, that was they were sure to get their lump of bread. So people can adapt to anything, and if you gave me a choice of going into a space colony or spending any time in one of Stalin's gulags, I can tell you which one I would answer with, and write quick too. Do maybe 2 more, something like that.